Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Hendrickson. This is my final project for History 4223. Today's lesson is on American mythology and the environment. I have it separated into two parts. How has the environment influenced society, and how has society influenced the environment? The objectives are outlined as follows. The content objective: recognize the environmental link within American folklore and understand the reality behind the fiction. And then the language objective: identify and use the supporting images to enhance understanding. So, how has the environment influenced society? Well, the environment is deep within our culture and deep within our mythology and folklore. Think about our cultural icons embedded in folklore. They are all intimately tied to the environment. Johnny Appleseed, Pecos Bill, Kit Carson, Davy Crockett, John Henry, Paul Bunyan, even the ones that were actual people as they passed into legend, into mythology, they're all tied to the environment, like Kit Carson and Davy Crockett. This image is from American political cartoonist William Gropper, titled William Gropper's America, It's Folklore. It is a product of its time. It's from 1946, but he really captures how American folklore is intimately tied to the environment. I want to point out Paul Bunyan because he appears twice in this image in the upper Midwest and in the Northwest. It demonstrates how, as the lumber industry drained the forest in one area, they moved west, and the mythology moved west with the lumber industry. And keeping with Paul Bunyan, American mythology also shapes our view of the physical geography of the environment. Paul Bunyan is responsible for the Puget Sound, the lakes of Minnesota, the Northern Lights, the Black Hills, among other things in mythology. Dr. Arthur Redding from York University has a fantastic quote that summarizes our mythology and our American relationship with that, a mythology that is intimately tied to the environment. Quote, Americans are produced not simply through historical experiences, but more powerfully through the stories that we tell about them. Cultural myths and stories enable us to locate our destiny and fabricate our collective and individual identities from the chaos and complexity of lived history. The image at the bottom, of course, a movie poster from Walt Disney's Davy Crockett. A couple images of Frontierland, I think, are appropriate to end this section because Walt Disney certainly capitalized on mythology and evoking the power of nostalgia. Moving on to how society has influenced the environment, the image here is from Pennsylvania, but it could be anywhere the lumber industry practiced clear cutting across the country. I want to briefly talk about the reality behind the mythology, behind the way of life. Ken Burns pulled back the curtain on Kit Carson in A Speck of the Future, and I want to do that here with the Paul Bunyan mythology. Logging camps were not the most pleasant places. It was long days. The work continued after logging. Livestock had to be taken care of. Saws had to be sharpened. The work was done in winter before the railroad because sleds were used to get the logs to market. The pay was low, there were bed bugs, and there was a very high mortality rate. One of the byproducts of the lumber industry coming into a region is extinction and replacement. A study was done in the Appalachians on the American chestnut tree, and loggers targeted specific trees before railroads that were lighter and easier to transport, And that completely changed the canopy and the composition of American forests. Animals went extinct, different animals moved in, less dominant species of trees became the dominant species. And the reason they studied the American chestnut tree in particular is because it had a dual impact from both loggers and a foreign disease that hurt the trees. One of the other byproducts of the logging industry, of course, fire. October 8th, 1871 is a monumental day. You may remember it as the date of the Great Chicago Fire. But north on Green Bay in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, a burgeoning lumber town, a fire broke out. There is no known cause, but the damage was actually more significant than the Great Chicago Fire. There were 1,500 dead, 1.3 million acres burned. What added to the fire? Well, slash and burn agricultural debris, weather conditions. The town had one horse-drawn firefighting apparatus, and then standard practices of the lumber industry at that time just left large piles of logs waiting to be picked up, all fuel for the fire. Now, in the aftermath, wasteful harvesting practices changed. There was adaptation of new firefighting and prevention techniques. And that fire was so significant, it was studied by the US military for incendiary devices, of which were deployed in World War II. So I'm going to conclude with one final quote from Dr. Redding. I think it's very poignant to both the lesson and to current events. Not only can the old myths no longer sustain us, we would be foolish to suppose that they ever could. This is my bibliography, primary and secondary sources, the images, and finally, thank you all for a great semester.